I never thought I would be the kind of woman who betrays the one person who trusted her the most. I never imagined I would allow myself to fall into temptation, let alone with the one man who should have been completely off limits. But no matter how hard I tried to fight it, no matter how many times I told myself that this was wrong, I couldn't stop what was happening. It all started so innocently. Small conversations, lingering glances, moments that felt harmless at the time. I convinced myself it was nothing. I told myself it was just a silly crush, something I would never act on. After all, I was married. I had a husband who loved me, a man who had given me everything. And yet, the more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. The guilt clawed at me. The shame burned through my skin. But that didn't stop my heart from racing every time he was near. It didn't stop the way my body reacted when he looked at me like I was the only woman in the world. I should have walked away. I should have done the right thing, but I didn't, and it destroyed everything. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself that a few stolen glances, a few moments of playful teasing, were harmless. But deep down, I knew I was lying to myself. There was a fire building inside me, and no matter how much I tried to smother it, it only grew stronger. It started with little things that I could justify if I wanted to. A lingering touch when he passed me the salt at dinner, his fingers grazing mine just a second longer than they should have. The way his eyes always seemed to find me in a crowded room, as if we were the only two people who mattered. I convinced myself that I was imagining it, that I was reading too much into things. After all, he was my husband's brother. He wouldn't. I wouldn't. But then came the late-night conversations, whispered words meant only for us. He would wait until my husband had fallen asleep before, sneaking into the kitchen, where I always found myself unable to sleep, pretending that I just needed a glass of water. At first, we just talked. About life. About dreams we had buried under responsibility. About what it meant to live a life that wasn't really ours. And then, one night, everything changed. I don't know if it was the way the light hit his face, or the way his voice dipped lower when he whispered my name. Maybe it was the way my body betrayed me, leaning in just a little too close, my breath hitching in my throat when his fingers brushed against my wrist. I should have pulled away. I should have ended it before it even began. But I didn't. Because at that moment, I didn't care about right or wrong. I didn't care about the consequences. I only cared about him. I should have walked away that night. I should have ignored the way my heart raced when he stood too close, the way my skin burned where his fingers had brushed against it. But desire is a dangerous thing. It doesn't listen to logic, and it doesn't care about consequences. That night, everything changed. It was late. The house was quiet, my husband sleeping soundly in the next room, unaware of the storm brewing right under his nose. I had gone to the kitchen, as I often did, telling myself I just needed a moment alone, but deep down, I knew why I was really there. And so did he. He was already there, leaning against the counter, a glass of whiskey in his hand, watching me, with those eyes that always seemed to see too much. I froze in place, my breath catching in my throat as I realized just how dangerous this had become. "We can't keep doing this," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my own heartbeat. His lips curled into a smirk, but there was something else in his expression, something deeper, darker. "Doing what?" he asked, tilting his head slightly. I swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the counter as if it could somehow anchor me to reality. "This, whatever this is." He took a slow step forward, closing the distance between us, his eyes never leaving mine. "Tell me to walk away," he said, his voice low and rough. "Tell me to stop looking at you like this. Tell me to stop wanting you, and I swear I will." I opened my mouth, but no words came out. Because the truth was, I didn't want him to stop. I wanted him to ruin me. He reached out, his fingers brushing against my cheek, and I shivered under his touch. It wasn't just the physical pull between us. It was something more. Something neither of us could fight anymore. "We can't," I whispered again, but my voice was weak, my resolve already breaking. "Then tell me you don't feel it," he challenged, his hand trailing down to my jaw, his thumb brushing against my lower lip. "Tell me you don't think about me when you shouldn't. Tell me you don't want this as much as I do." I wanted to lie. I wanted to push him away. But instead I did. The one thing I knew I could never take back, I leaned in. The moment our lips met, the world around us disappeared. It was reckless, dangerous, forbidden, but none of that mattered anymore. I don't know how long we stood there, tangled in each other, lost in something we could never undo. But then, just as suddenly as it had begun, reality came crashing back. A sound from the hallway. Footsteps. Panic surged through me and I pushed him away, my chest heaving, my mind spinning. My husband was awake, and he was coming straight for us. Panic surged through my veins like wildfire. My husband's footsteps echoed down the hallway, each step growing louder, closer, threatening to unravel everything. I shoved his brother away, my breathing uneven, my body still trembling from the fire that had just ignited between us. He stepped back quickly, his expression shifting from desire to urgency. His lips parted, as if he wanted to say something, but there was no time. We both knew that if we were caught, there would be no explanation, no excuse, no way to undo what had just happened. I turned away, forcing myself to move, to do anything that would make this look less damning. I reached for a glass, filled it, with water, and gripped it tightly between my fingers, pretending as if I had only come down for a drink. But my hands were shaking. My entire body was betraying me. The kitchen door creaked open. I turned just as my husband entered, his face groggy with sleep, his hair disheveled, his eyes barely adjusted to the dim light. But even half asleep, I could see the way his gaze flicked between us, the way something in him stiffened. He looked at me first, then at his brother. His brows furrowed slightly. "What are you two doing up so late?" My heart pounded. He hadn't seen anything. He didn't know. But there was suspicion in his voice, in the way his eyes lingered a little too long. I just needed some water," I stammered, lifting the glass as proof, though my trembling hands nearly gave me away. His brother, to my surprise, remained calm. He took a sip of his whiskey, his demeanor so casual that it almost infuriated me. "I couldn't sleep," he said smoothly, shrugging as if nothing had just happened, as if I hadn't been in his arms seconds ago. "Figured I'd have a drink before heading back to bed." My husband exhaled tiredly, rubbing his temple. "You both should get some rest," he muttered before turning away, already half lost in his exhaustion. I didn't breathe until he was completely out of sight. The silence between us was deafening. I turned to his brother, my chest still rising, and falling rapidly, my body still thrumming with the aftershocks of what we'd done. "This can't happen again," I whispered, my voice hoarse, my mind screaming at me to walk away before it was too late. But when he stepped forward, his fingers grazing mine for the briefest moment, I knew I had just told the biggest lie of my life. Because we had already crossed the line, and there was no going back. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, my heart ached with a weight I had never known before. What had started as an unspoken tension, a temptation too strong to resist, had now become something far more dangerous, an irreversible moment that could shatter everything. The guilt was suffocating, wrapping around me like chains I had willingly locked myself into. My husband lay beside me, breathing steadily, trusting, unaware. I turned to look at him, my chest tightening with a mixture of regret and something even more terrifying. Undeniable longing for someone else. How had I let it come to this? I knew deep down that if I let this continue, if I indulged in this forbidden pull again, there would be no stopping the destruction that would follow. Love, loyalty, marriage, these were not things to be played with, yet I had gambled them, all for a fleeting moment of passion. Temptation is a fire that burns hotter than reason, but it always leaves ashes behind. I had a choice to make. Either I would pull myself back from the edge, confess my sins, and salvage what was left, or I would allow myself to drown in something that would ultimately destroy us all. One thing was certain. No matter which path I chose, life would never be the same again.